Today, we're diving into one of Bangladesh's most infamous and, honestly, heartbreaking unsolved crimes. It's a story that kicks off on what was a completely normal Friday, but it ends in a national tragedy. And, it's a tragedy that, even over a decade later, is still screaming for an answer.
And it all starts with these 6 absolutely haunting words. See, on the morning of February 11th, 2012, this is the message a little 5-year-old boy delivered over the phone to his grandmother. He had no idea, of course, that he was alerting the world to something truly horrific.
That single phone call from their son, Meg, it launched this massive search for justice that, believe it or not, is still going on today. It blew the lid off a brutal double murder that would just completely baffle investigators and, really, leave an entire nation demanding to know not just who did this, but why in the world is it still unsolved?
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story really begins on that morning in Dhaka, just as the full scope of this horror was starting to come to light.
I mean, think about this for a second. Just the day before, Sagar and Runi, they had a completely ordinary day. Totally normal. They went to their jobs, their son went to a school picnic. It was a life of routine, of success, and that's what makes the insane violence that just erupted overnight all the more jarring.
Okay, so when investigators got to the scene, the evidence immediately pointed away from a simple robbery. I mean, right off the bat, there was no forced entry. That suggests the killers were probably let in. And get this, while the apartment was totally ransacked, valuables like money and jewelry left untouched. The only things missing were Sagar's laptop and his phone. So yeah, this wasn't random. This felt personal. It felt targeted. And then the autopsy report comes in, and it just reveals the sheer brutality of this attack. Sagar had been stabbed 28 times. 28. The level of violence here, it's personal, it's extreme, it suggests a kind of rage that goes way, way beyond any simple burglary.
And as if that wasn't enough to suggest a frenzied attack, forensic analysis pointed to 3 different types of knives being used. Now, a detail like that, it could point to multiple attackers, or maybe, just maybe, a single killer in a state of absolute extreme personal rage.
So, look, a crime this targeted and this brutal, it naturally raises the question, who were these victims? Well, they weren't just any couple. Sagar and Runi were 2 of the most prominent journalists in all of Bangladesh. We're talking a true media power couple.
So you've got Sagar, a news editor at Masaranga Television, and then there's Runi, a senior reporter for ATN Bangla. Both of them were seriously respected for their tenacious work. I mean, they were known for digging into really sensitive topics, things like corruption in the energy sector, human rights issues, the kind of reporting that puts you in the spotlight and, potentially right in the line of fire.
But here's where the story takes another tragic turn. The investigation into their murder, well, it would become its own kind of tragedy. For more than a decade now, the search for their killers has just been this incredibly frustrating story of failure. It's one of those cases that turns a personal tragedy into a huge systemic injustice.
In the immediate aftermath, the Home Minister at the time made this incredibly bold promise to the nation. It was meant to be this big declaration, to reassure a totally shocked public that justice would be swift. But that promise, well, it ended up becoming a symbol of just how badly this investigation would fail.
And the pace of the investigation since then, well, it's been agonizing. That initial 48-hour deadline, it came and went, just like that. Years later, there was what seemed like a breakthrough. FBI DNA analysis confirmed 2 male attackers, but their identities were still a complete mystery. The case just got passed from agency to agency. Deadlines were missed over and over, and, with every single delay, that hope for resolution just dwindled.
I mean, just let this number sink in for a second. Over 120. That's how many times the court has granted investigators an extension to submit their report. 120 times. We're talking more than a decade of delays. This isn't just a stalled investigation anymore. It's a total procedural nightmare.
So you might be asking, what have all these years of investigation actually produced? Well, essentially, it all boils down to 2 competing theories and a list of suspects with absolutely no concrete evidence linking any of them to the crime.
And these 2 main theories, they couldn't be more different. On one hand, you have the idea of a professional hit, something meant to silence their investigative journalism. On the other hand, a claim floated by Runi's own boss, suggesting it was a crime of passion. Now, that second theory, it caused widespread outrage, and for good reason. It was never, ever supported by a single shred of evidence.
Now, the evidence for that first theory, the one about their journalism, is actually pretty compelling. Think about it. The stolen laptop and phone, the fact they had no known personal enemies, and the sad reality that Bangladesh can be a very dangerous place for journalists. It all points to their work being the motive, and it's what their family is absolutely convinced is the reason they were killed.
And the official list of suspects, man, it's just as puzzling. It includes 7 men, and get this, most of them were already suspects in another eerily similar murder. The building security guard is also on the list, but here's the crucial part. After all this time, there is still zero physical evidence connecting a single one of them to the crime scene.
And all of this, it brings us to the devastating reality of the case today. After more than a decade of broken promises and total failures, this has become the textbook example of that old saying, justice delayed is justice denied.
And this is maybe the biggest paradox of the whole case. There is actual scientific proof. DNA analyzed by the FBI confirms that 2 unknown men were in that apartment. So we have the what, a brutal double murder, we just don't have the who.
Now, not long ago, the case was handed over to a new task force, and they were given a strict deadline. This prompted a high court judge to make this really hopeful, but also very weary statement. And it perfectly reflects a nation that is just desperate for answers, but has been let down time and time and time again. And that brings us to the final, unavoidable question here. After more than 120 deferrals, after more than a decade of these investigative failures, has the central question of this whole mystery shifted? Maybe we're no longer just asking who the killers are. Because maybe the biggest question now is simply when. When will there be justice? When will this family and an entire nation finally get the answers they've deserved for so long?